Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Bienvenue au panel de ce Paris Peace Forum 2020, panel intitulé « Non à la désinformation, combattre les infodémies et construire une infosphère fiable ». Je m'appelle Caroline Vimin, je suis la directrice de la Fondation Hirondelle, une organisation suisse qui a été créée il y a 25 ans pour fournir des informations aux populations en période de crise et leur permettre d'agir dans leur vie citoyenne et quotidienne. Je suis ravie de vous accueillir ce soir avec 3 panélistes qui ont beaucoup à partager avec nous et qui sont aujourd'hui dans une action déterminante dans la lutte contre la désinformation. Les informations fiables sont indispensables pour assurer la résilience des sociétés en temps de crise ou d'incertitude. La désinformation et les discours de haine peuvent installer un sentiment d'insécurité et quand elles s'installent durablement, elles peuvent perturber la paix civile, perturber une élection ou perturber la lutte contre une pandémie comme nous l'avons tous testé et vécu cette année avec le corona. Pour discuter de ces enjeux, nous avons le plaisir d'accueillir cet après-midi Hilde Hardeman, directrice du service des instruments de politique étrangère de la Commission européenne. Votre service, Hilde, a lancé de nombreux projets afin d'informer et de protéger les populations, notamment les populations dans des zones fragiles, contre de la désinformation. Nous avons également Maria Ressa, directrice et rédactrice en chef du média Rappler aux Philippines. Maria, merci d'être avec nous. C'est le milieu de la nuit aux Philippines. Vous êtes lauréate de plusieurs prix en journalisme et aujourd'hui en première ligne pour dénoncer les mécanismes et les conséquences de la désinformation aux Philippines, mais pas uniquement dans le monde entier. Et également avec nous ce soir, Christophe Deloire, directeur général de l'ONG Reporters sans frontières et président du Forum sur l'information et la démocratie. Ce forum cherche et propose des solutions pour contrer le monopole des plateformes digitales dans la distribution de l'information et de la désinformation. C'est vrai que cette dernière circule plus vite et plus massivement que les faits et l'information vérifiée. Nous avons 45 minutes, le sujet est vaste. Malheureusement, il ne sera pas possible de prendre des questions des participants en ligne à cause d'un problème technique. Mais je sais, pour avoir préparé le panel avec nos 3 experts, qu'on a déjà de quoi partager et discuter avec vous pour le temps qui nous est imparti. J'aimerais commencer avec une première question à nos 3 panélistes pour savoir en fait quels sont les enjeux et les risques liés à la diffusion de la désinformation et qu'est-ce qu'on en sait aujourd'hui. Hilde, s'il vous plaît, pour commencer.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm really honored to be here with such great professionals together in this panel. Listen, information and means of communication have always been used to further political goals and win hearts and minds, to nurture peace or to fuel conflict. This is, I think, as old as mankind itself. And we also all know that reliable information can save lives and that disinformation can kill. What is different now as compared to, let's say, 1,000 or 100 or 50 years ago is that social media and virtual tools allow news to spread super fast with near unlimited reach and make it very easy for those who wish to spread false information, be it individuals, organizations, states, to do so very effectively. And the pandemic is further accelerating this trend. Now, what is at stake? At stake are our freedom to think and to make choices as individuals, our rights, our health, our dignity. And at stake are also the values on which our societies are based: democracy, the rule of law, respect for human rights. As was the case with the emergence of the printing press, with radio, with television, our digital tools can really bring a lot of positive things. to many people, and we must nurture and encourage that. At the same time, we must do all we can to counter efforts to use these tools for conflict and for strife, for undermining our values and our societies. So harmful content, extremist propaganda, hate speech, incitement to violence or disinformation campaigns, often distributed via social media and messaging apps, has inevitably real life implications. And those can be very serious indeed. A few examples: the violence in Myanmar against the Rohingya community, farmer herder clashes in Nigeria, recruitment efforts of Islamic State in many countries, disinformation related to elections, live streaming. Imagine live streaming of hate attacks in Christchurch, New Zealand, or in Halle, Germany, and now very recently, the discrediting of potentially very important life-saving vaccines in many places. All parts of the world are affected by this, but in conflict affected areas where digital literacy is often still rather young, where access to information and freedom of expression have often been restricted, the consequences of such viral, harmful online contents are really particularly serious. And the COVID-19, as I said, is exacerbating these trends. The risks these trends pose to lives are very serious indeed, and we need to be strongly aware of them and act upon them. Now, to counter these negative trends, fostering critical thinking, independent journalism, conflict-sensitive reporting are all crucial, and so is a robust regulatory framework. At the same time, we need to establish early warning and debunking systems to identify and counter disinformation. Media professionals, civil society, the private sector, states and international organizations all have a role to play. And in doing so, we must all be conscious of challenges to privacy and to protection of personal data. Now, we will discuss further later on how to tackle these challenges. But let me maybe conclude these first thoughts by letting you know that the team in the European Union that follows disinformation, in particular Stratcom as we call them, will come in the next few days with a public report on how they assess disinformation in the context of COVID. And you will not be surprised, there's nothing new under the sun at all. We see lots of conspiracy theories about why there is the pandemic, what is the purpose of the lockdown. We see lots of discrediting of vaccines, and it's important to say also by state actors. So anything that you can expect here. Now with this, I would conclude my answer to my thoughts on your first question. Thank you very much.
Merci Hilde. Christophe, j'aimerais rebondir. Hilde nous dit que ce qui est en danger, c'est la démocratie et le vivre ensemble dans nos sociétés. Pourquoi justement avoir choisi d'appeler ce forum Information et démocratie? Quel lien on peut faire et qu'est-ce qui est en danger dans la démocratie avec la désinformation?
La démocratie, c'est un certain nombre de fonctions différentes. L'élection est évidemment une fonction importante, mais la délibération publique, la satisfaction du droit à la fiabilité, à l'information fiable, c'est des éléments majeurs d'une société démocratique et sans lesquels il n'y en a pas. Et ça n'est d'ailleurs pas un hasard si on regarde la chronologie des 25 dernières années. Si la démocratie se trouve aujourd'hui en crise, la crise de la démocratie, c'est d'abord une crise de la délibération de notre capacité à discuter sans tomber dans l'opprobre, dans l'insulte, dans la haine, dans l'appel à la violence, dans la rumeur, dans tous ces phénomènes qui ont été amplifiés par les réseaux sociaux. Et la question qui se pose à nous, c'est comment on fait pour sortir de ça. Et c'est pourquoi, avec Maria Ressa, ici présente, avec d'autres, on a lancé il y a 2 ans l'initiative sur l'information et la démocratie. Pour dire que là, on est dans une situation de chaos informationnel. Ce que j'appelle le chaos informationnel, c'est le fait que aujourd'hui, cet espace digital, il est dérégulé. Que tous les contenus de sortes très différentes s'y trouvent en concurrence directe. La propagande d'État, la publicité, l'information sponsorisée par l'intérêt, le journalisme, la rumeur. Et ça, c'est inédit dans l'histoire des démocraties. Ça n'est jamais arrivé comme ça. Et donc, la question, c'est comment, en tant que citoyen de pays démocratiques, on contribue à l'organisation de cette délibération publique et on fait en sorte qu'elle soit fondée sur des principes démocratiques. Dans un espace qui, pour la première fois dans l'histoire, est globalisé. Parce que la digitalisation, c'est la globalisation. Et donc, avec Maria et quelques autres, on a défini des grands principes de ce que qui devrait être imposé dans l'espace global de l'information et de la communication. Puis c'est devenu un partenariat international sur l'information et la démocratie signé par 38 pays désormais de tous les continents. C'est une coalition d'États démocratiques. Et puis on a créé ce forum sur l'information et la démocratie, qui est un organe d'application dirigé par la société civile et qui dit que ces enjeux, ils sont tellement nouveaux qu'au fond, on voit bien aucun des parlements au monde aujourd'hui n'a trouvé la solution pour réguler. Parce qu'au fond, les modèles de régulation d'avant, du système médiatique d'avant, ça ne marche pas pour les plateformes. Donc il faut inventer. Et pour inventer, quoi de mieux que d'avoir des gens un peu partout dans le monde, de profils très différents, des chercheurs, des juristes, et de les faire travailler pour formuler des recommandations. Et si on se trouve là aujourd'hui, c'est peut-être parce que demain matin, le Forum sur l'information et la démocratie va présenter au ministre des Affaires étrangères de l'Alliance pour le multilatéralisme le résultat de son premier groupe de travail, qui est un groupe de travail sur les infodémies, sur les rumeurs, la propagande, notamment en période d'épidémie, mais pas seulement. C'est un travail qui a été mené notamment grâce à un comité de pilotage qui était co-présidé par Maria Ressa et par Mariette Schaake. Ça a été un travail extraordinaire. Il y aura 250 propositions pour la régulation. En fait, je pense que le but d'un panel ou d'une réunion comme celle qu'on a aujourd'hui, c'est que la fois suivante, on parle d'autre chose parce qu'on a avancé. On essaie d'apporter des solutions extrêmement concrètes.
Merci. Maria Ressa, en tant que journaliste et confrontée tous les jours à des choix éditoriaux, à la vérification des faits par rapport à l'opinion ou le mensonge, comment vous vivez cette désinformation et quelles conséquences elle a eu dans votre quotidien de journaliste et de rédactrice en chef, ce qui, j'imagine, vous a amené à vous engager dans l'initiative Information et démocratie?
So, Caroline, thank you so much for the question, but it's very hard for me to hear everything that was said. The French translation is a little too loud and I couldn't hear, sorry, the French was too loud, could not hear the English translation. What I heard you say is you asked, how the lies have impacted what we lived through as a journalist. And that's an easy one. I think you can look at our case and see how since 2016, I've literally been jumping up and down to say that we are at an alarming point, an existential moment. The level of lies are spreading faster and further than facts. And in my own personal experience, what we've seen is, in 2016, which is roughly when President Duterte was elected in May, Brexit happened a month later. And then we went on. The first domino that fell, I would say, came from the Philippines. And in 2016, if you just look at it, we challenged two huge power centers, President Duterte and the Philippine government, in terms of a very brutal drug war, and Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg for the propaganda war, for the weaponization of social media. In 2016, two things happened. I was, when we came out with a series, I was personally attacked. And as soon as we finished this 3-part series looking at the weaponization of the internet, I received an average of 90 hate messages per hour, not a month, per hour. And that lasted through most of 2016. That kind of bottom-up attacks they were meant to do two things: silence me and Rappler, And it does make you, it's a new weapon, and women in the Philippines have been targeted at least 10 times more than men. That's the first, is to have a personal impact on you. And then the second is to create a fake consensus, manufactured consensus, a bandwagon effect that tears down trust in media, for example. And then I guess before I turn it back to you, I just want to show you how narratives form and how they change reality over time. This is exactly the same thing that we're seeing happen in the United States. I lived through it in 4 years. In 2016, the narrative of the disinformation networks, the attacks against us, is journalist equals criminal. That's when it was seeded in 2016. And in 2016, I could laugh because I thought, oh, well, you know, my track record will stand by me and people will remember. Well, I shouldn't have laughed, because by 2017, President Duterte himself came top down and repeated the same lies coming up. Within a week of President Duterte saying that in his State of the Nation address, we got our first subpoena. 2018 followed with 11 cases that were filed against me and Rappler. So the government moved, weaponization of the law. 2019, I received 8 arrest warrants. By February, in about 5 weeks, I was arrested twice and detained. And those cases are ongoing. And then in 2020, journalist equals criminal. I was convicted June 15th in a Manila court along with a former colleague. It was for a story we published in 2012 at a time when the crime we allegedly violated wasn't even enforced. It had just been passed and was being challenged. It's a story I didn't write, edit, or supervise, right? So now I have to deal with almost 100 years maximum prison for these politically motivated charges. We'll keep fighting them in court, but it changes people's minds. And I think this is the greatest danger. The world's largest distributor of news is Facebook. That is how we get news and information. And yet the design of these social media platforms work against facts. They are biased against facts. Lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than facts. That's shown in all the research. So this is the fundamental problem, and that is what Christoph, I believe, spoke about, where we tried to look for systemic solutions, because without facts, there is nothing humanity can do. We can't have democracy without facts.
Merci Maria. Effectivement, les faits sont essentiels et reconnaître les faits pour ensuite débattre et accepter de ne pas être d'accord, c'est une des missions des médias et du journalisme, mais il faut encore pouvoir au départ se reconnaître sur des faits. Il y a donc pas mal à l'heure actuelle d'initiatives pour contrer cette désinformation. Est-ce qu'il y a déjà des leçons qu'on peut tirer des efforts actuels? Et peut-être aussi, si vous pouvez nous dire, qu'est-ce qu'il reste à faire? Hilde, par rapport à votre programme Informer et soutenir la population, quelles leçons vous avez déjà tirées de ces programmes, et est-ce qu'il y a un effet positif de vos efforts?
Thank you very much, Caroline. And of course, after the very, very concrete input from Maria, at the risk of sounding rather theoretical, so a lesson that we draw from what we have been doing in the COVID-19 crisis on disinformation, information, is really how vital access to reliable and transparent information to facts is, and also how much digital tools in the end can unite. They do not only divide. The same channels that hold risks in terms of harmful content hold also enormous opportunities for better communication of reliable facts and for broad inclusion. These are things that we have seen through our work in a number of conflict-stricken areas, and it is something that we really feel we need to make the most of, something to which we all can and must contribute. If we look at the infodemic related to COVID-19, as we all know, it's particularly visible, particularly harmful. And we also all know that it's definitely not the first and also not the last example. So we have to make sure, as Christophe and Maria said, that we are well equipped to deal with this type of phenomenon. We need to educate in fact checking. We need to multiply reliable information and debunk false information. We need to foster critical thinking, that is crucially important, and public resilience. And as has been said, we need to engage the social media platforms. Some of them have opened units that deal with human rights, that deal with conflict, and we should work with them to help them integrate better in the peace-building community. We should proactively engage. But very importantly, as Maria and Christophe have said, we need to hold them accountable as any actor that has such broad and deep global influence. And of course, clearly, media professionals, and I'm very honored to be with such top media professionals here, are absolutely key actors in identifying harmful content, in providing reliable information. So for us, additional resources and training to build the capacity of media professionals, especially in vulnerable communities, is for us one of the best investments we can make to facilitate the dissemination of reliable information, fact-checking, and the promotion of peace and mutual support. The initiative that Maria with Marietje Schaake, Christophe is taking is extremely important in this regard. Fact checkers, civil society organizations, and grassroots activists, they all play essential roles in providing reliable information, debunking false information, and also, very importantly, creating early warning mechanisms that can alert citizens, media, social media platform, and authorities about potentially harmful content. For instance, in our work in Iraq, we have seen that fact checkers alerted the Ministry of Health to warn that there was false information circulating relating to the pandemic. And we have seen that all these actors together, the authorities, civil society, have made sure that in the end this was set right and that there is now much more, that people are much more alert for having correct information. Then, more generally, nurturing broader public resilience to divisive rhetoric and fostering critical thinking. These are things that one has to learn from the moment that one is a small child, but one can learn it also later on. It's crucial. And I would also like to underline that dealing with disinformation on the one side and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, starting with the freedom of expression, really go hand in hand. So disinformation tackling disinformation does not at all mean that you need to limit the freedom of speech. On the contrary. And in all of this, as it has been emphasized, we need a robust regulatory framework. We all need principles and mechanisms to protect our lives and information in cyberspace. Now, at a time when risks may affect large numbers of individuals simultaneously in different jurisdictions, closer forms of cooperation between authorities at the international level can help ensure both a vibrant information ecosystem and more effective protection of individual rights and data. So, like we do every day in our physical lives, we need also in the digital world, we need to find the balance between freedoms on the one hand and protection on the other hand, based on shared principles and clear, transparent rules. the EU has significant experience already, and we are very happy to share that. But I would like to add that the European Commission is also well aware of the fact that more needs to be done. So further developing a regulatory framework in this context, one that respects human rights, the rule of law, is something that is very high on the agenda of the European Commission. So I would say more to follow on this. That's all on my end. Thank you.
Merci Hilde. Christophe, qu'est-ce que vous avez déjà pu faire ou initier sur cette question de rendre les plateformes plus redevables, plus transparentes et tenter de définir un cadre de régulation national ou international? Est-ce que dans vos groupes de travail, au sein de votre initiative, il y a déjà des avancées ou des propositions concrètes qui existent?
A few years ago, and even a few months ago, a lot of people said, politicians, journalists, etc., we have to give responsibilities to platforms. They have to be responsible. But the question is, based on what? Based on which principles? Responsibility is not just something from scratch. You have to be responsible to comply with something. So we need a reference, and that there was a huge lack regarding this. So that's why we launched this initiative on information democracy, working with Maria Ressa. That's why tomorrow we will publish this report with 250 recommendations about what you mentioned, Caroline, transparency of platforms and algorithm, principles for the content moderation. How can we have a guarantee that content moderation is appropriate, that platforms do not censor too much, or on the contrary, do not keep hate speech on the social networks. We also decided to deal with how to concretely promote trustworthiness of news and information. How do we impose to platforms a prohibition of conflicts of interest? Because there is no guarantee today that the way the algorithm functions, the way it reveals the reality, is not influenced by the interest, by the commercial business interest of the company. So this is the reality is today showed through the social networks according to a business logic. This is not now the organization of the public space, of the public square, is based on a commercial logic and not anymore on a democratic logic. That's how those recommendations could help. And finally, there is a new challenge, which is private messaging systems. Of course, we have to protect privacy. We have to protect absolutely the secret of messages between two individuals, three individuals, when you exchange with people you know. But private messaging systems are also used to just amplify disinformation. You can transfer and multiply the transfers, and you enter, in this case, into a public space logic. What do we do with this? There are many, many answers in this report. So now we have solutions. We are in a period when, as Hilde Hardeman said about Europe, but this is true about other countries or areas, there are laws to be passed, there are projects, Digital Charter in Canada, Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act in Europe, Section 213 in the US, Section 79 in India, etc. But that's the key moment to have appropriate regulations, because we need regulation, but we need regulation that is not dangerous for press, for freedom of expression, for democracy. So the question is, which laws will be passed? And all the people who want to defend democratic values have really to consider that this is a key challenge. Climate change is a key challenge for humanity, but this one, or the way we collectively debate, is another key challenge, and this is really a key moment too.
Merci. Si je comprends bien, la question, la solution et la réponse à la question n'est pas que technologique, elle est aussi politique. Marie, parmi les recommandations ou les initiatives qui existent, on voit bien qu'on peut agir à différents niveaux pour essayer de résoudre ce problème de la désinformation au niveau des États, au niveau des médias, au niveau des journalistes individuellement et au niveau des citoyens. Où penses-tu qu'il faut mettre la priorité?
You know, so we look at this in three different layers. The first is if we can stop the lies. So this is tech. The second is if we can continue making sure the facts, that power is held to account, the journalism survives. And then the third one is that civil society gets the facts it needs, right? Civil society organizes. But you know, before I go to the solution, can I just reframe it just slightly by looking at how different this information ecosystem is from anything we've ever been used to? Think about it this way. I think 3 points. One is that in the world we all knew, journalists, the gatekeepers of the public sphere, were accountable for lies. If people believed lies, the reporter could be sued, the publication can be sued. Journalists have lost their gatekeeping powers, and that's been taken by tech. But the problem is tech abdicated responsibility for protecting the public sphere. And so what happened then is that it went one step further. This is not the old world where you have just a highway, right? This is the design of the technology platforms are fitted to the weaknesses of the human psyche. So neuroscience plays a role in this. Think of social media as behavior modification platforms, because that's literally what they do, right? If you watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, 35 million households, I think, have watched it since it was released, right? But what it does is it shows you that when you put your data, we tend to look at only the content, the first layer of data. We read it and we think that's it. But there's a second layer of data, and that is the connections, the model that is built of you. So first, you put in all your thoughts into your social media platform, that a machine learning comes in and creates a model that knows you better than you know yourself. Then that model of you then is pulled up by artificial intelligence, and your weakest moment to a message is sold to a company or a country. Your weakest moment to a message. And then you are nudged with that message. And when you react, your reaction, whether you accept it or you don't, feeds back into the second layer of data. And it's a perpetual machine, right? So think of, again, it's a behavior modification system. It's ongoing social experiment with insidious manipulation for every citizen around the world. That's the way to look at the technology, and why the business model, why predictive behavioral analytics is dangerous. And then I think the second thing is, you know, I don't think we should get rid of these platforms because technology can be used for social good, right? I had hoped that technology would jumpstart development in the Philippines. That was why we set up Rappler in 2012. That's why we're Facebook partners. We're fact-checking partners of Facebook. But the problem is that this business model and greed has a real world impact because it changes the way we think. And that really is the biggest thing. It has now built into the design, torn apart our societies. What spreads fastest are conspiracy theories. And you see the same thing happening in the United States that happened to us. The conspiracy theories of voter fraud, for example, seeded on RT coming out of President Trump, and people conflict, the polarity of situation. It is dangerous. So I guess the last part is, so how do we solve this, right? That's why we spent the last few months working with some of the best minds. Sina Naral is part of the committee. He just wrote a book, published it, called The Hype Machine. There are many other, Christopher Wiley, the former Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, helped on this endeavor. Anya Schifrin, Media and Society. I think this is one of those moments where we're faced, it's an existential moment for facts, which means it's an existential moment for democracy. And if we can then turn the lies off, like the virus, if we can at least flatten the curve of the lies, then the journalists can do our jobs and the attacks against us will diminish and the distribution of the facts can bloom. After that happens, then civil society needs to get stronger. This isn't one of those moments where all you do as a voter is vote, right? This is one of those moments where you have to ask yourself the same question that I asked myself 4 years ago, which is, what are you willing to sacrifice for the truth? Because that's truly where it is. Sorry, I can talk about this forever because I feel like it's like 75 years ago when an atom bomb went off. And globally, we need to find a solution.
Merci. Il nous reste un peu moins de 10 minutes. On se rend bien compte que c'est un problème global. On a vu aux États-Unis, en Europe, aux Philippines, mais il y a aussi toute une partie de la population aujourd'hui dans le monde qui est certes face à de la désinformation, mais qui est moins exposée aux plateformes et aux réseaux sociaux. Je pense à des parties de l'Afrique ou de l'Asie moins connectées. Est-ce que ces pays-là aujourd'hui sont déjà sensibles aux enjeux, sont partie prenante, par exemple, de l'initiative démocratie et information, Christophe, ou est-ce que c'est, entre guillemets, un problème du Nord?
Non, ce n'est pas du tout un problème du Nord. Cette fragilisation du débat public, cette propagation des rumeurs, elle a d'ailleurs des impacts très forts dans des pays dont les systèmes politiques sont plus fragiles. Donc c'est vraiment pas un problème du Nord. Je crois que c'est très bien perçu, y compris dans des pays qui, évidemment, pesant moins peut-être sur la scène géopolitique, ont plus de mal à se dire qu'ils vont pouvoir imposer des principes démocratiques aux plateformes. Donc, il y a besoin de coalitions internationales pour cette raison-là. Il y a besoin de coalitions internationales pour une seconde raison, qui est le fait qu'il y a le danger des pouvoirs, des intérêts privés, des plateformes sous influence d'intérêts privés et qui aujourd'hui ont le pouvoir des gouvernements et le droit des individus, la liberté d'expression. Je parle des entités elles-mêmes. Et puis, il y a l'autre problème en face, qui est les régimes despotiques, qui, eux, essaient d'imposer leur ordre mondial de l'information, et notamment Pékin, la Chine en premier lieu. Et donc, il y a besoin de coalitions de pays démocratiques pour pouvoir sécuriser un espace démocratique international du point de vue de la délibération. Évidemment que la démocratie, pour le reste, elle reste essentiellement nationale, mais il ne s'agit pas de revenir simplement à des espaces nationaux. Ce qu'on doit tenter de faire sur le plan de la stratégie politique, c'est d'avoir un espace démocratique le plus large, le plus international possible, mais qui résiste face au régime despotique. Et pour ça, il y a une coalition qui aujourd'hui est appropriée, où il y a des pays du Nord et du Sud. Il y a la Corée du Sud, l'Afrique du Sud, le Chili, le Canada, des pays européens. C'est la coalition des 38 pays qui ont signé le partenariat international sur l'information et la démocratie et qui aujourd'hui peuvent jouer un rôle vraiment très important. Dans le partenariat, il est précisé que ces pays doivent se rencontrer tous les ans, qu'une conférence des parties, d'une certaine manière, doit être organisée tous les ans. On veillera évidemment à ce que ce soit le cas.
Merci. Et peut-être que d'autres conférences internationales, je pense la semaine prochaine à la 2e conférence mondiale pour la liberté des médias qui va être co-organisée par le Botswana et le Canada à la suite de la première conférence à Londres l'année prochaine, peut reprendre ce sujet de la désinformation et d'alliance internationale. On a aussi la Journée internationale de la liberté d'expression et la liberté d'informer du 3 mai qui a été décalée à décembre cette année du fait de la pandémie et qui devrait, j'espère, être un autre moment pour rappeler ces enjeux et permettre à la société civile, mais aussi aux États, aux médias, aux citoyens de mettre ce sujet en haut de l'agenda. Effectivement, par rapport aux enjeux globaux aujourd'hui qui nous concernent, ce phénomène de désinformation et d'infodémie est premier et a des conséquences qui ont déjà fait beaucoup de mal et qui pourraient dans le futur en faire beaucoup plus. Nous arrivons à la fin de ce panel. J'aimerais vous remercier. On a vu que la désinformation n'est pas un phénomène nouveau. La rumeur, le mensonge, la manipulation des opinions ont toujours existé et cette volonté pour certains d'enfermer des individus dans des croyances, des convictions n'est pas un phénomène nouveau, mais les nouvelles technologies et les algorithmes aujourd'hui des plateformes digitales accentue ce phénomène. Ça touche effectivement quasiment tous les pays, tous les écosystèmes médiatiques, mais c'est vrai que dans les pays fragiles ou les pays en conflit, on voit que les effets sont d'autant plus néfastes. Les médias indépendants, les journalistes relayant les faits sont en grande partie dépassés par la vitesse, les moyens et la capacité des acteurs qui dominent aujourd'hui l'écosystème médiatique. La solution n'est donc pas que technologique, mais elle est aussi politique, sociétale et économique. Merci à nouveau à nos panélistes pour leur participation ce soir. Désolée pour les participants qui n'ont pas pu poser de questions. J'espère que nos échanges auront été intéressants pour vous. Les organisateurs du Paris Peace Forum vous remercient également et moi je tiens à les remercier d'avoir mis ce sujet de la désinformation à l'honneur dans leur programme, pour rebondir vers un monde meilleur où effectivement l'information fiable, utile et d'intérêt général est disponible pour tous les citoyens. Merci à vous et bonne soirée.
Merci beaucoup.
What a day. I've been thinking that perhaps we might have a crash of the platform, or perhaps we might be prevented from doing this because of problems of connections, etc. Yes, we had a few glitches, but by and large, we're very happy with this first afternoon of the third edition of the Paris Peace Forum. We have been able to link people from around the world, from the 5 continents, together on the same platform, working on solutions to the same problem, which is COVID-19. Either it's the thousands of people here on the platform, or the people that have joined us through YouTube and Facebook, who have been watching the stream, or the trending topic, Paris Peace Forum 2020. It has been quite an afternoon and quite an experience. I think the main takeaway I would keep from this afternoon is how much we focused on COVID-19. I'm thinking of the first session, for example, the one that featured Michael Bloomberg, Mayor Hidalgo from Paris, but also the mayor of Wuhan, a city that has been much in the news this year, to explain us what cities are doing against COVID-19 and how they banded together through the Covenant of Mayors or the C40 to give each other tips and best practices to fight COVID-19. Yes, the international institutions have not always been up to the task, but this network of cities has been quite impressive in what they've been doing. You know, obviously, one other striking thing is how much we've been able to team up with other large events. First of all, there's an event in the event, if you'd like, which is the Summit in Common, the Finance in Common Summit of Development Banks that started this afternoon, but that will sort of reach its maximum tomorrow, especially in the afternoon, where we are gathering 450 development banks, making commitments to align their investment on climate objectives. And that's another takeaway. It's how we are able to leverage this to get things done. Another example of a large event is the COP15. We had this very interesting panel on biodiversity, and we know what the relationship between the lack of preservation of nature and COVID-19 and pandemics has been. And we had not only Razan Al-Mubarak from the UAE and Minister Abba from France, but also the Chinese negotiator for the COP15. As many of you know, COP15 is this really important summit around biodiversity, which was supposed to happen in 2020, but will now happen in 2021. One last example, the Generation Equality Forum. We've just heard, thanks to Trisha, who has been volunteering last minute to moderate this panel, all about the preparation and what we can do to prepare for the Generation Equality Forum. That forum on gender equality under the auspices of the UN will happen next year. It was supposed to be this year, but here again, COVID-19 pushed everything a year back, and it's known as Beijing Plus 25 after the famous meeting in Beijing 25 years ago. On top of supporting and enhancing the reach of these important other gatherings, I think we've been able to make a difference on the solutions we bring to COVID-19, whether it was for refugees, with this fascinating panel that you can see in replay, like all of the other panels now on the platform. They will also soon be on YouTube with Nadia Murad, the Nobel Peace Prize, but also Peter Maurer from the Red Cross and David Miliband from the International Rescue Committee. How can we help refugees that suffer the double plight of being refugees, but also of suffering from COVID-19? But also Africa with the first panel we had, but also the effect of COVID-19 on information, and I'm thinking of the panel on infodemics we had with Reporters Without Borders and the European Commission, what they are doing concretely against this. Or one last example, the initiatives that are taken to make sure that health workers are protected, but also that they are spread evenly around countries and that the migration of health workers is not detrimental to some countries. Now, I'd like also to bring your attention to another type of replay that you can get, which is the ones on the pitches made by projects. As you know, the Paris Peace Forum at its heart has these projects, these 100 projects that we selected from the 850 applications that we received back in June. And all of them have one moment to pitch their project, explain it, share it, get visibility. All of them are available in replay once they've been performed, if you'd like. And this afternoon, we've seen quite a few extraordinary pitches of projects. I'm thinking, for example, of the Indian state of Sikkim, which has gone entirely organic. All of the agriculture of Sikkim is now organic, and they are still making progress in that direction, and they are also being held as a model for others. That was a fascinating one. But also, WHO has been pitching a project that they have for an app which facilitates the fight against COVID-19 and has been also a sort of gripping moment. Now, what shall we expect for tomorrow? Tomorrow is an important day, especially in the afternoon. We'll have great sessions tomorrow morning, but we'll have even better sessions in the afternoon, or I would say more important one with highlights. As we mentioned before, there are two objectives in this third edition of the forum. One is to prepare the world of tomorrow, the post-COVID-19 world. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. we'll have the gathering of the heads of state between 2 and 4 p.m. We'll have a first hour, which I will have the pleasure to moderate with Melissa Bell from CNN, which will be on the contribution that many heads of state will make about these principles for the post-COVID-19 world and the commitments that they will make. Then from 3 to 4, in the second half of that session, around President Emmanuel Macron, along with Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, but also President Macky Sall from Senegal, and Charles Michel, the president of the European Council. So all of them will be at the Élysée tomorrow, working on the principles for the post-COVID-19 world, and they will be joined by Angela Merkel, Ursula von der Leyen, and Antonio Guterres from the UN, who will sort of join their forces in that objective. But the second objective of the Paris Peace Forum this year is not only to think about the post-COVID-19 world, simply because we are not there yet. First of all, the main objective is to get out of the crisis and put forward all the solutions that will allow us to get out of the crisis. At 4 p.m., we'll have the summit of development banks, all these banks making commitments to not only relaunch the economy, but also align their investment with climate objectives. And at 5:30 p.m., we'll have a really important session on vaccines. You know, the recent announcement that Pfizer has evoked considerable hope for a vaccine. And it's great news, except that this vaccine is not only very expensive, it's also really hard to preserve, since you need to keep it at a temperature of minus 80 degrees, which obviously even your fridge cannot produce. And so this is both good news and also the sign that we need a more widely available vaccine, a cheaper vaccine, simply because we need to vaccinate everybody, or at least 20% of the population of all countries, rather than 20% of the countries with 100% of the population. In other words, we will not get out of this pandemic before we make vaccines available to all. And that will be exactly the point of the 5:30 session, focusing on vaccines, around Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, the head of the WHO, President Macron, Melinda Gates from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Erna Solberg, the Prime Minister from Norway, and a couple of other really important stakeholders. As you know, the Paris Peace Forum is all about multi-actor initiatives, that is to say, putting all the different categories of actors around the table. That's what will happen on this panel on vaccines tomorrow at 5:30, along with announcements that will be made on the financing of these vaccines and new resources made available so that everybody can get a vaccine. We've now reached the end of our first day. Thank you for being with us, and I hope I will see you tomorrow for these very exciting highlights, and we really hope you've enjoyed that day. Goodbye.